Hello and welcome back to the second episode of Legacies Lost and Found, the podcast that explores the lives of change makers through conversations that connect these people to the communities that they serve and those that support them. Joining me today is Sara Bafo. From supporting direct action movements to building new systems centered around collective care, Sara is a dedicated community organizer and educator. Her writing features principles she's guided by: abolitionism, anti-racial capitalism, and anti-imperialism. She brings these principles to her youth practice, introducing young people to revolutionary poets to draw out conversations and develop understandings of poverty, intergenerational trauma, trauma from the police state, and more. Now, that's just to name some of what you do. Today, we're going to be delving into the world of Sara Bafo. Welcome. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. That's such a beautiful way to introduce me into this space. So thank you first and foremost. I'm doing okay. I'm really excited to be in conversation with you and just to be in dialogue on like how we organize, how we build and be in community.
Thank you so much for your time. I've, following you on social media, keeping track of the things that you get up to, and it seems like at this moment it's a bit of a whirlwind. So can you tell me a little bit about what's going on, the kind of things that you're working on?
So as we know, we're seeing imperialist escalation all over. We're seeing the rise of fascism. Like I'm always like, fascism is not in our doorsteps, it's in our homes, it's in our TVs, it's in the back of our pockets with social media. So we're constantly witnessing it, and also witnessing the systemic harm in our communities. Just yesterday, or this morning, we witnessed an attack on a mosque where Muslim people were murdered by fascists. So this idea of like we're witnessing the harms in our communities and the systemic harm. So my organizing is situated in how do we do liberatory practices? How do we work and struggle towards a liberated world? So that's always the work that I'm doing in the context of this oppressive world that we're in. I'm also situated in the belly of the beast. So my work is like, okay, like if I'm in Britain, what is my role in organizing and in a country that has historically violated and pillaged and stole from so many countries in the global south? So my role here is to be like, how can I organize in different struggles all over? So my work is actually internationalist. I come from a tradition of internationalist organizing, local and global. So a lot of local community organizing that's connected to a lot of global organizing. So that's the context. And what I actually do is very different things. So my role is I come from a youth worker background, but specifically making youth work back into a radical tradition and a radical like principle of we are supporting young people into the struggle towards building this liberatory world, right? We want young people to actually live and survive. So my goal is to be like, actually, how do you connect what's happening to them to these systems that are harming them? So e.g. the schooling system. So we know the school to prison pipeline exists. We also know the fact that like their material needs are not being supported. So how can they even sit in a classroom and learn when their material needs are not being met by the state? So I was a youth worker for a very long time in different spaces, and one of those spaces being Forefront Project, which really took like an abolitionist idea of how do we organize in community for and by us. And my role was to really do the one-to-one support with young people, and also to build like political educational programs, to be like for young people to feel so energized and inspired to be like, one, I learn and then I can teach.
Mm. So whenabouts was that start with youth work?
Oh, so I actually technically started youth work when I was like 18. And I say that because I used to go to my local youth club, which was, yeah, it was in West London. So I went there as a young person. And then I had the opportunity when I was 18 to start working with young people with special needs, and my role to actually like support them and yeah, just support them the best way I possibly can, with of course having like a mentor who teaches you what that support looks like. So that was actually my one of my first jobs. And then I went into academia. And when I was in academia with all of the student organizing that I did, I really wanted to go back into my root, which was, yeah, which was community organizing. Like I started out, like I started out organizing in community. And then when I left academia, I was like, let me go back. And then I started doing youth work again.
I've got a similar experience of starting youth work. I think maybe a little bit later on. It was during my studies. And you mentioned there like the role of being in the belly of the beast as an internationalist, as someone who sees systems of harm being interconnected on a global scale.
Mm.
That's something that I think about a lot as well. And it can be quite daunting, right? To think, well, either like there's a like this profound sense of duty, like or like my proximity to the centers of power, but also what the hell do I do? It's like, and so something that I've personally struggled with is this: the problems feel so big, and sometimes the work we're doing or the work that I do can sometimes feel quite small. Have you ever
Mm.
felt something similar to that?
Definitely. There's always in the back of my head that like I can do more.
Mm,
Like I must do more. Like I'm bearing witness to all of the atrocities that are happening all across the world by in a country that I'm currently situated in. So there's constantly about like what can I do? But then I also what helps me is the struggle isn't about individuals.
mm,
Like it isn't just about me doing more. It's about how can I engage in community and how can I engage in organization, revolutionary organizations. So that's what gives me that
mm,
sense of calmness of like actually it's not about what I do. It's about what can my actions contribute to community, to these organizations that are rooted in liberatory practices. So then you see yourself as a we, like, and capitalism does this, right? They teach us that like we're just individuals who are navigating this world. And then for us, there's an act of refusal to be like, no, I'm actually in community. I have it. So even if, for example, I take a step back and something happens to me, I know that there's community and organizations that have their foundations and they have their strategy. So then is this idea of like the organization doesn't rely on individuals, it relies on us as a collective. So yeah, there's many, many times, to be honest, I felt tired, I felt burnt out, I felt exhausted. But then what gives me the sense of relief and comfort is like I'm in community, I'm struggling with my comrades, I'm struggling with people who are my neighbors. And we all have this vision that like we know we want better. That's what gives me comfort. So yeah, I've always experienced this yearning of like I need to do more. Like I have to do more. But I say then I have to remind myself that like it's a we, like we're in struggle.
and that sense of community, is that something that you had to seek out and find, or is it something that's always been a part of you from your younger years, from your youth, something that's always been prevalent and thus you see the value of?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just like community is ever changing. Like, it's not this idea of like you're gonna have just a community and that's it. It's like it's constantly changing and it's evolving, and it's also evolving in where you're placed and like what like moment you are in your own life, right, and your own politicization. So like my communities have changed, but I still have my people I've known for a very long time and my comrades and people I and my elders, but it's changed. It's changed over the years. I'm lucky enough to grow up in a house that was like an open door policy where I had people coming into my house. So I had like aunties and uncles who weren't my aunt, they were my aunties and uncles, but like it was people who used to, my mom used to open up the doors and like people used to stay over. We had this thing of like actually people can go inside our kitchen and eat and we can make food. So that was my first introduction of like community, and especially when a lot of Somali people were migrating, right? Like in the 80s and the 90s, specifically the 90s after the Civil War, it was this idea of like I saw how much they relied on each other, of like people, even if you don't know them, right? And you just learn their name, they will still come to your house and stay in your house until they find another place to stay. I witnessed this, like I witnessed the struggle of like being in community and like what happens when you don't have that. So I witnessed it and I was like, actually, I want to honor that tradition. Like I wanna be in community. Me and my friends, I remember us, like I come from like a working class background, right? And I am working class, but I remember growing up and it's like my friend had like £10. Like we're splitting it with all four of us. Like we'll find a way and we'll go and like eat food together. So this idea of like I had that, but I also want to know that community is political, right? This idea of like we're not just in community for the sake of community, we're actually also in community because I believe that like you should be in a just world. They believe that I should be in a just world, and how can we organize? And also, I know that there's a very like liberal idea of what community is. It's just idea of like actually we just exist with each other, and I'm like, no, we actually have a duty to each other,
Mm,
and that's
yeah,
what community is.
I'm really intrigued by the cultural dimension, and specifically, are there any named concepts that exist in Somali culture that induce that open door policy, looking after more
Yeah.
communal responsibility? If so, what are they? Can you speak to them?
Yeah, so we have this, as you asked that question, we have this word called Somali limo. And like what we mean by Somali limo is this idea of like this sense of kinship and this sense of community. And any Somali person that's listening to me is probably gonna say I butchered it. Um, but it's yeah, so it's this sense of community and like familiarity, even if you don't know each other. So for example, there's many times where I see a Somali auntie on the bus or I see a Somali person, and you feel the sense of like, actually, I don't know you, but I also feel safe.
Mm,
Like I also feel like actually they will intervene if a fascist is moving a little bit wayward. All fascists move wayward and wicked. But also not just with Somalis. I know like they would interact and stop it if a fascist was attacking another group of people. But Somali Nimo is this concept that I grew up with. I don't remember a time where I did not know that word and what that word meant. In a way to be like, actually we're in community together. So like it was the Somali Nimo of my mum opening up the doors with people to stay in our house, even though our house was a council house and it was small, and had come from a big family, but it was like actually there was no questions, right? But we knew the importance of that. We knew the importance of like waking up and then there's like a big breakfast with different people laughing and joking. And yeah, like that's how so many of my aunties met their partners, was because there was these community dinners that was happening. So yeah, Somali Nimo is a word that so many Somalis know. You just ask a Somali person what's Somali Nimo, and they have so many different stories.
Somali Nimmo.
Yeah.
Well, the flip side of that then is, what about spaces when that concept or anything close to that concept is absent?
Mm.
And where have you experienced that, and what and how does it feel different?
Mm. I think for us, it's different. It becomes different when we end up being captured by what capitalism tries to force down us with individualism. This idea of like, I just need to get some money, get this career, and just survive as an individual. And I've seen this happen, right? Or this idea of like the de-radicalization of community. So what I mean by that is this idea of like depoliticization of like, actually, we're not going to learn our history. We're not going to learn about the colonial violence in our country and the fact that like actually when we talk about the civil war in Somalia, that it came from this very long colonial history of Britain actually pillaging and systemically oppressing our countries. So then when our communities become depoliticized, that's when the Somali Nimok starts to fade away. And it's not about us connecting as a community, it's us then just surviving as individuals. And we know we can't survive as individuals. So I've seen it many times where I've been in spaces where I'm like, actually it's just like you need to put your head down and work. Don't question the system. Actually, if you question the system then and you get backlash, then it's your fault because you questioned it.
Mm.
You should have just like turned the other eye. Or when you see injustice, turn the other eye. And we saw this again in like a couple of years ago when the Palestinian uprisings and the liberation, and when people was like, just turn another eye. Actually, let's condemn the fact that the Palestinians are uprising against colonial and apartheid violence, and the fact that they're literally resisting a set of colonial entity. So we constantly saw this rhetoric of like, don't speak up. But if you speak up, then your career might be ruined.
Mm.
And as I'm like, at this point, we should what career are we thinking about when the world is burning and when we're witnessing set of colonialism? Like, I don't care about a career, I care about a just world. So that's when I've seen that sense of Somali Nimo be taken away, and Somali Nimo in everyone,
Yeah.
in whole communities.
Yeah, I think not only that individualism exists to a great extent
Mm.
here in Britain, but also that it's increasing is made evident by the scale of the Iraq protests.
Mm.
Uh, what 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago, something like that, compared to the scale of the Palestine protests, which,
Yeah.
for us, we're in that world. We feel like it's all
Mm.
that anyone talks about. It's all that anyone
Yeah.
lives and breathes, is like thinking about these global injustices. But
Mm.
I saw the like figures compared to the Iraq war protests from 20 years ago. It's like a fraction of the amount of people, you know,
Yeah.
and it was like in the millions for the Iraq, and it really like for a moment it spun me because I was like,
Yeah.
I thought this was like huge, and I think obviously globally it's
Yeah.
huge, but I think yeah, within the UK, it's not as big as absolutely it ought to be, and yeah, and I
Mm.
think that's evidence of that like growing individualism.
is a is a question about like actually tactics, right?
Mm,
Like we saw with the imperialist escalation of violence in Iraq and Afghanistan, and people were out on the streets, right? You had like a million people come out on the street and say, actually, we don't want our government to arm a genocidal war, right, in Iraq and Afghanistan. But they still continue to do that, right? They still continue to do that. We saw this in the last couple of years that people are on the streets and they're still selling arms to the Zionist entity. So for us, it's a matter of like actually, what does it look like to change strategies and tactics? And like, what does it look like to be out on the streets? But and also what does it look like to be in organizations that are actually, what Ghassan Kalafani talks about is this idea of like striking the heart of the imperialist beast, right? And then you serve the world's revolution. So actually start thinking about like, yeah, what does it look like to be strategic? Because and not use the same tactics. And that's what we're witnessing if we look at 20 years ago and we look at now, like the same similar tactics are being used. And for us to be like, actually, we need to flip it and be like, let's change the tactics.
Okay, so that brings us nicely on to your current work and the current organizing. How does your organizing now learn from those mistakes of the past where things weren't effective, and how does organizing look different?
There's different tactics that we need to organize against, but also we're organizing against the same system. So like I'm gonna be a Marxist-Leninist, and yeah, talk about how also right now the primary contradiction is imperialism. So we know, like all of the work that I'm doing in different organizing is, we know the primary contradiction, the primary enemy is imperialism, and with that, then we're seeing it play out in our local conditions, right? So this is what we're seeing with the prison industrial complex. The prison industrial complex doesn't serve the people. We know it supports the imperial interest, right? Imperialist interest. We know that like right now our communities are not being materially supported. We know that they have enough resources and materials to arm Israel, the Zionist entity. So what the work that we're doing also with the school to prison pipeline, we know that when young people are excluded from school, they're most likely to enter the prison machine, right? And we know the prison machine, again, similar to what I said, is connected to imperialism. So to your question about different organizing spaces, it's all connected. Like I don't see my organizing as a separate group.
Mm,
It's like it's working towards the same goal, which is liberation fundamentally, right? I come from a youth work background, right? So this idea of like when I support young people and like we talk about their material needs is also essentially to be like, yeah, we can support individual young people's material needs, but how do we create a world where it's not just constantly supporting people's material needs, their material needs are already being met. So these are the different things that I've been thinking about with my organizing is yeah, to really, really think about, okay, like we do the political education, we do the community organizing, and then we do the resistance, right? And then we start imagining this world that we're building. And this imagination doesn't come in the end, it's in every moment of the organizing.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that kind of emphasis on the interconnectivity of different systems of oppression necessitates the interconnectivity of different ways of resisting, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of your work and your writing also centers around abolitionism, which is once again tied intimately with
Mm.
anti-imperialism as well. Could you, for anyone who doesn't know, explain a little bit of what abolitionism is
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
what abolitionism might look like across different institutions?
Yes. So abolition is rooted in transformative justice, right? Like this idea of like how do we address harm without causing more harm in the most simplistic way? As this idea of how do we not rely on punitive systems, carceral systems that were never designed to protect and serve our communities, but actually go back into community solutions. A lot of people think abolition is just about destroying everything, destroying all of the institutions. It is because we believe in destroying violent and harmful systems, but it's about the reimagination process. It's this idea of like abolition allows us to reimagine a just world, a transformative world. A world that doesn't say we need to penalize and criminalize people for the conditions created by the oppressor. So fundamentally, abolition is about that. It's this idea of we're not relying on the oppressor's systems to talk about harm and justice because the oppressor can never give us systems of justice and transformative justice. So abolition is fundamentally in the most simplistic way is it allows us to reimagine a just world and it allows us to move away from the systems and institutions of the people that have systematically oppressed us for centuries upon centuries. So that's abolition. But tangibly what that looks like is to be like, okay, we know that exclusions and punitive practices in schools does not address the actual reason why a child is reacting in a classroom. We also know that actually it doesn't go into the roots of why a child is going through what they're going through. So again, it's about actually how do we sit with children, give them the next necessary care practices so they're able to go into a space to learn, right? A lot of children who come from working class backgrounds, their guardians and parents are one paycheck away from being unhoused. So this idea of like we don't blame the children for reacting in the conditions that have been created outside of them. So we want to hold children, we want to care for children, we want to create an environment where children can learn and laugh and be joyful. So abolition says that actually exclusion does not address or doesn't serve children. And what we're saying is let's get rid of exclusions and abolish exclusions, and we can create a transformative educational space where children can learn and thrive. And we know that exclusions are connected to prison, the school to prison pipeline.
Mm.
Another way is, right, is the prison system. A lot of when people think about abolition, they think about the abolition of police and prisons, which it is, right? But it's saying that actually we know historically that this idea, this concept of criminality and crime, right, has not been reduced. It has not. We know that actually crime, so-called crime under the belly of the beast is increasing. So we're saying that actually their systems are not even working, right? They're pumping so much money into the police and prison. We're saying actually let's create an alternative. How an alternative, not alternative of violence, an alternative of care. Alternative to be like actually, how do we address harm? Because we know harm is going to happen in our communities. We're not oblivious to it, but we're like, let's create another process of addressing harm. And I've tangibly done that over the year where we've not relied on the punitive practices of these violent institutions. So it does work. And I write a lot about how we can like start thinking and actively doing it.
Amazing, yeah. And I find it fascinating now that I'm stepping out into different spots in London and just seeing,
Mm.
facial recognition technologies being
Yeah.
deployed without any notice, without any warning, and
Hmm.
just kind of assuming that this is something that the public would consent to or have to consent to.
Mm.
One is interesting where these things are being deployed,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
two, how much it costs and how
Yep.
much money is being invested into innovating carceral technologies and surveillance technologies rather than investing in communities. It,
Yeah.
it's frustrating to say the least.
And again, and it's what you said about like it's in so many like racialized working class communities, and it's done strategically, right? We know that over policing in our communities, but it's also these systems rely on manufacturing consent. And what I mean by manufacturing consent, they need us to normalize the fact that there's a facial recognition van outside Brixton all the time. They want us to normalize the fact that they're increasing the budget of the Metropolitan Police every other year without any no questions asked. They want us not to question the fact that there's private prisons in the UK and why we have private prisons and the fact that corporations are benefiting from the incarcerations of our communities. So these are the things that like these systems of being in the belly of the beast and capitalism and imperialism relies on us not to question. It's to be like this is normal. Actually, the person who's at fault is oh, you must be hiding something if you don't agree with facial recognition. Why would you not agree with facial recognition? But then the flip question is, why is the state putting technology that surveils us in every single corner when we're already London is one of the most surveilled places in the world? So the question is, we need to throw the question back at these systems, and as a way to crush any type of resistance or a resistance and organizing against the system.
So your way of organizing and activism has changed over the years and may actually change depending on the hour of the day. And I read somewhere that you received media backlash from Zionist media after speaking out on Palestine. What happened there, and how were you silenced?
Mm. So that comes in a time that I was heavily involved in student organizing, and part of like the student movement, which my role as a student activist, many years ago, it varied, right? Like, so I was, a student activist where I occupy the building. I was involved in protests, and really like at the front lines of like resisting the institution and academia and the ivory tower. And then my role shifted towards becoming a sabbatical officer, which for people who don't know, that's being a representative in the student union where you're democratically elected to represent students. So I was a sabbatical officer for 2 years. I was the welfare and liberation officer, and then I became the president of the student union. And with that, I was democratically elected with students knowing my position on Palestinian liberation and Palestinian resistance and my unwillingness to actually ever de-radicalize and depoliticize on my position on Palestine. Because fundamentally my organizing and I was radicalized on Palestine, and the beautiful resistance that are happening in Palestine in the midst of being like at the attempts of the US imperialism and Zionist entity trying to stop the uprising, but they can never stop it. So I was elected on that position, and I came in, and the institution thought I was just going to come in and not speak about Palestine. So I did that. I constantly, with my other sabbatical officers and the people I organized with, we, yeah, like we spoke about it. We organized around it. One of our demands, actually, when I was a student organizer, was around reinstating Palestinian scholarship. So we occupied a building and we had 12 demands, and one of our key demands was around reinstating Palestinian scholarships. So they used to have it, and they used to have it many years ago, and then they secretly took it out. And one of our one is like, we're not leaving this building until you reinstate Palestinian scholarship, these Palestinian scholarships, which they actually still use today after we won that demand. So my role as a sabbatical officer was to be like, actually, you're not going to agree to a demand and not fulfill it. So I was constantly in meetings mentioning this demand and actually being like it has to happen. And as the president at the time, I sat at one of the highest decision making bodies, which is council. But again, me being vocal then meant the fact that I ended up getting backlash from the Zionist media many times on my position against Zionism and academics who are Zionists. They wanted me to retract my statement that I made around Zionism and white supremacy. I refused, and then that meant that I received backlash. It wasn't the first time I received backlash from the far right media. I actually received it a year before for being involved in implementing a policy which was around racial trauma and extenuating circumstances. So the idea of that students are able to extenuate their essays and exams because of racial trauma, and this being the fact that like actually we're witnessing Black people being murdered by the police, or Black people being constantly brutalized by white supremacy, and you want them to submit an essay in 1 week, 7 days, like that fundamentally did not make sense. And we also, like, there's been many ways that like students could extenuate. And I'm like, why hasn't that happened? They ended up agreeing to it, and I don't know how they agreed to it. I don't know what that day they just agreed to a policy that I put forward. And then that ended up getting backlash. So the year prior, I had my first proper taste of like receiving backlash from the far right. And like my pictures being used, my name being used in like the Daily Mail, the Telegraph. And this is the media machine, right? The media is not separate from imperialism. It's not separated from white supremacy. Actually, is there to amplify a lot of these racist rhetoric. And I remember receiving countless racial abuse. Like I learned new words that I did not know existed. Like it was so
Oh,
literally,
you
I
can
was
call
like,
me that as well.
oh my God, what's that? Let me put that in my
Okay,
notebook.
okay.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I was getting that a lot, especially at the time where I was really vocal on Twitter. And again, I never received institutional support. So the institution actually received amazing feedback. So they received amazing feedback as being the first university to ever implement racial trauma. And then me being the person who implemented it and put forward the policy was receiving so much backlash. So you see how these institutions end up like taking the struggle on the ground and then capitalizing on it. So we saw it. They profited off this image of being the most liberal university that implemented racial trauma. And then me being the one who was receiving no support whilst receiving racial abuse. And then the following was the abuse I got from the Zionist media.
Wow. So, I mean, the first observation is you have to experience racial trauma to alleviate existing racial trauma. It's
Yeah, yeah,
so that
yeah.
must have been such a difficult time for you personally. You spoke about community earlier. Who was around you to support you during that time, and how did they support you?
Yeah, it was really hard. It was hard in a sense of like I was young, right? I was a young person in organizing spaces, and this was the first time that I had my face plastered in far right media. It was in a media platform in America that published a report on it. So I was like, okay, this is a lot, but I would not be here if it wasn't for my community. Like I always knew that the institution was never going to support me. Actually, I never put any effort into relying on support by them, because I knew that they were a part of the my struggle, right? The struggle towards actually building a liberatory educational system. They're complicit in everything that I was working against. So it was my community that supported me. I had my community that I was able to sit with. It was my communities that were doing public statements in support of me without me asking. So actually going public and to be like, we support Sarah. And this is specifically around when I was getting attacked by the Zionist media. People who also were attacked by the Zionist media coming and speaking about like the different ways that they were able to navigate it. But what was beautiful about my community is like not once did I have my community to be like, you should make a statement to retract what you said, or you should basically then say something that protects your so-called this so-called career that people always talk about, right? That was the beauty of my community. They were like, you know what, you did what you needed to do, you said what you needed to say, and we're going to support you and to hold you in that process, on this process of being unapologetically against these violent systems. So yeah, not once did my community make me feel guilty or second question what I did.
Mm.
They fundamentally supported the fact that actually no, we need to be vocal against the Zionist entity and not fall into manufacturing consent of their existence. So yeah, I remember just having late night calls. I remember the first article that was published by one of the Zionist media, and I knew it was coming out. So I knew it was coming out because I got an email saying, would you like to comment on this article that we're publishing at 8 a.m.? And I'm like, firstly, you're not even going to accept the comment that I'm going to make anyways. And I'm not going to actually normalize the designism by actually engaging in a conversation or dialogue. So I knew that that was coming out. So actually that next day, I had my community around me. So it was published. And I was like, okay, I wasn't alone. I had my community that were like, okay, these are the next steps so we can support you.
And on that, those decisions that you're making, like whether or not to engage with the media, whether or not to seek support from the educational institution,
Yeah.
are these calculated decisions? If so, is that a decision that you make on your own? Is that something that you also take to the group and say, what should I do? Or is it like you're following your gut on these things?
Mm. I'm always big on speaking to elders and community.
Mm.
Like, and for example, there's many ideas or like approaches that I had, but also I believe in sharpening your approaches and your analysis and your ideas. So having a community to be like, actually, and this is beyond that, me going to them about the media. I always go to my community to be like, okay, like this is something that I have an idea on or I'm working on. And actually, I need my community to critique me. Actually, I need my community to be like, actually, that isn't an idea that is rooted in what we're trying to build. So also need your community to critique you and hold you accountable. So I always go back to my community. I don't think there's a decision I've made around community building or organizing where I didn't go to my elders or I didn't go to people who are like my elders are my comrades, but like people who are my age and we're in struggle together alongside my elders who are also I'm in struggle with. So yeah, I think I always go back into it. But I also know my decisions are also based on me sharpening my analysis and my politics and my reading. Because I also believe that like actually it's theory and practice. We also need to go back into like our struggle isn't new. Like there's been past revolutionary struggles and like people who's organized, who's made the same mistakes, who've struggled in different ways. How do we learn from that? So my organizing is coming from that tradition of like learning from the past and then also being in community where we re-strategize.
While we're here, any particular readings you'd recommend?
Anything to do with Walter Rodney, Franz Fanon, trying to think, The Trinity of Fundamentals. That's a really, really great book. What else? I can do so many books. I think what I can do as an offering is give you a list and then you can maybe add it into
Yeah,
it.
that would be
But
great.
I think yeah, so like what radicalized me also was the Malcolm X autobiography.
Same here.
Um,
Same here.
yeah, so many people have different stories on the Malcolm X.
Yeah.
And also Joe James talks about the violence of because I spoke a lot about these so-called educational systems and academia. Joe James talks a lot about academia and its violence and the role of people who are in it.
Wow. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure we can put together some kind of reading list in the description of the podcast, so people can check out once it's out. You mentioned, yeah, sharpening your tools through reading and through, you know, whether it's just learning through experience, speaking to elders. What are you doing differently now? How has your approach changed?
My organizing and my politics has transitioned, and I've allowed it to transition in this idea of like as I'm reading and as I'm learning, I'm sharpening my analysis. So this idea of like now I can come into it to be like, actually I've sharpened my analysis on Marxist-Leninism. Like I've sharpened my analysis on how I look at racial capitalism and the importance of being in organizational structures. Whereas like earlier on, when I was engaged in direct action and I was engaged in like protesting and doing other types of resistance, it fell into quite reactionary organizing.
Mm,
This idea of like we do direct action, then we do another direct action, and then we do another direct action without making it rooted into like, okay, how do we add that into sustainability?
mm,
To be like, actually, for us to do direct action, it should be involved in an organization that is building its organizers in the organization through political education, through strategy, and there's a commitment to each other and the organization. So I think for me, what's different is I've allowed my politics to progress. Allowed my politics to sharpen. I've not caged myself into a politics I had when I was 18
mm,
or politics I had at 19. I'm like at this point in my late 20s, I'm like, actually I've allowed myself to be like, I'm reading, and it's this idea of practice theory practice. Like I've practiced, I'm also reading my theory, and I'm practicing again, and then I'm going to read the theory again. So it's allowing yourself, for anyone who's just getting into organizing or isn't organizing, is allow your organizing to continuously sharpen and sharpen its tools, so then you can like be a part of this like revolutionary struggle towards liberation. So yeah, I look back as like when I first started organizing. Yeah, I was young. I was young. I was energetic. I'm still energetic, but now I know I'm more sharpened, and I've said sharpened probably 100 times in this podcast. I'm more like able to be like, okay, like I know that this is also a long-term struggle because these systems and imperialism has existed for a very long time, and in this long-term struggle, what can we do in it? Like this idea of like, we believe that liberation is going to happen in our lifetime, but also allowing that like people in Cape Verde, in Guinea-Bissau, and Burkina Faso, and in Vietnam, and Algeria, they've they've engaged in revolutionary struggles. There's so much anti-colonial struggles that existed, and we're part of this lineage and this tradition of organizing towards final liberation, which is socialism. In anyone listening, yeah. So I think for me, it's like I know what is needed to be done. And in 10 years, I might be like, my politics has shifted and changed because of the context that we're in. But what has been consistent is, if you read a lot of these anti-colonial struggles, and if you read a lot of the resistance in the global south and here, a lot of it has rooted its politics in Marxist-Leninism. A lot of it has rooted in this black radical tradition of Marxist-Leninism. So I think for us, there's some stuff that we know have evolved and changed and sharpened, but there's some stuff that like we come from a lineage of like building away from capitalism. And that's something I'm holding on to. So to answer your question in summary, I've just learned and read and I've practiced, and I got it wrong. I've gotten it wrong so many times. So that's how I'm able to learn too, is allow yourself to get it wrong with your community.
amazing. I think that's a great place to leave it. So thank you so much for your time, your insight, your experience, your wise words. I'm so excited to see what you're part of and what you continue to be part of, and how that grows and develops. Where can other people get involved, keep up with you?
You mainly my Instagram, which is Sara Sara, and then dot Bafo Bafo. And yeah, that's it. And all my Twitter is the same. You can go just search up Sara Bafo and you can find all my tweets and my thoughts. And also on my Instagram is my link tree with all my writings that I've done.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone
Yeah.
for listening. You can follow Legacies Lost and Found on Instagram at Legacies Lost Found. Follow us, leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, and stay tuned for the next one.